let's load some geometry into this panel surface, because this is an airport surface. There's going to be some data into it. There's going to be structure. There's going to be panels. All those things we can kind of model as a typical condition, as if they were a panel themselves. So what I need to do is make that as a family, and it's similar to a curtain wall panel, except it's a separate family type. So I'll come into the R, and I'll go New, Family. And I'll make sure I'm under the Imperial side. And then I'm going to do a curtain wall pattern base. So today we're going to do curtain wall patterns, and we're going to do adaptive components. We're going to do both of those. And I'm going to click Open. So at the face value here is I have a few things happening. One, I have my placement points. So this is going to be one cellular unit of that division. And then the blue lines are my grid. So if I wanted to model some other type of panel to go into the grid, so let's say I wanted to do, we'll stick with the rectangle. Later on we'll do maybe a hexagon with it. So that grid is what is how I'm modeling it. So there's no 1/3 step curtain wall pattern grid template. I do it all in the same family template itself. So you'll see that when I select a different pattern, it's going to allow me a different framework to build off of. Right? So I'll just change my grid to be rectangle for now. Now some other things. These points are called placement points. Right? So Revit's going to look at every one of those nodal points on that divided surface, and it's going to say that I'm going to load a piece into each one of those. And then I'm going to connect a line to it. So some things we haven't talked about yet are reference lines. So reference lines afford you the ability to snap to specific points versus being reference planes that are not able to snap to specific points. So in this case, I want to, at face value, I'm just going to create a form off of those reference lines. Right, and I'm going to just create an elevated surface. That's fine. Okay. And then if I snap to one side of this, right, I want to give it a height, right? So right now it's reading this 4-foot height. I'm going to click on, there's a dimension string next to the numerical reading of that surface once I snap to it. If I click on that line, or that dimension string, I can now assign a parameter called height to my panel. Okay. And then I'm going to just go ahead and load that into my project. So we'll be slowly building on top of this, right? So there's that one. And now it won't automatically put it onto that surface for me, right? I have to explicitly tell it that now I want you to be the pattern of rectangle family 1 that I just created. And you'll see now it facets that surface for me. And if I tab through now, I can select panels as if they were curtain wall panels, and I can edit the type of that, and I should see my height, and maybe I want my height to be 12 feet. If I click apply and click OK, right, it'll elevate that surface for me. Okay. So some things that are not happening in this are that really I'm getting from that faceting, right, I'm not able to get the corners to match up correctly. So there's some things that I need to do to clean that up. But at face value, it works pretty well. So let's say that I want to have a flat glass surface, and maybe I just want to have a perimeter structure now on that panel. So I'll come in, I'm going to tab through, so I just get the one panel. I should be able to edit that family. So I'm coming back to my piece. So I'm going to delete off that top surface, delete my dimensions. And then that, because it's created based on these reference lines, and those reference lines are struck to those points, it's going to stay stuck in place. So now I want to create a structural element that wraps the perimeter of this. Right? So how I do that is I need to place a point at the center line of one of those reference lines. So it's kind of hard to see. If I do TL on the computer keyboard, it'll turn things to thin lines versus thick lines. And then I can kind of see the point here. So I kind of just want to sweep a profile around that perimeter edge. So what I'll do is I'll go into my create panel. I'm going to set my work plane. and I'm going to hover over my point value, and then I'm going to draw, make sure I'm snapping on that point itself, not the center, or not the midpoint, but the actual point I placed at the midpoint, because I'm creating a hierarchy that you're not visually seeing. It's more of an order of operations in this sense. So I'm going to draw it kind of big so I can see it, and then the same way I put a height parameter onto that, I'm going to click on that dimension string for a radial dimension. I'm going to select it, add a parameter, and I'm going to call it radius. Click OK. And then I'm going to take after I've done that, I'm going to take my piece and then my reference lines, and I'm going to create form. And then it's going to sweep a profile around that. And then if I load that into my project, and I overwrite what I did prior, right, I should see now my structural grid loaded in on top of my panel surface. Okay. So some other things I would want to do, if I edit that family again, I would want to take my pieces, right, and I would want to put material parameters onto them. So this one would be structure, and then the other one would be, if I hide that geometry temporarily, tab through and select my panel surface, add another parameter called panel, click OK. Right, and then I'll reset my hide elements, load that into my project. Now inside my family level here, I'll be able to now change the panel visibility, what it looks like. So I'll tab through and grab one of those panels, edit its type, and I should see my materials now here as well. So my structure, maybe I'll make a default white. That chipboard's fine. And then my panel, I'll make glass. There we go. Right, so now I have a nice glass roof on top of this. And what's nice about this really is now I've selected this panel. The drawback is I have one motion with this. I can't really start swapping out panels with this, right? At least I don't think I can. I would go back and say that this is now, I'm going to do a new rectangle family and see if I can do between the two. I'm pretty sure I can't. But I'll do a new family and check it. So on this one, I'll just go back to that original large piece. I'll load that in. Go to my 3D view. So what I want to try and do is say that, okay, on this particular panel, I'm going to say that you're now family 2. Oh, and it works. So yeah, the same way now that I had my had done my curtain walls where I could change these individually. Because of the same type of grading system, I'm able to pick different panels for each one of those, which is actually kind of nice. In the event I'm doing maybe a garden roof or anything like that, right? Because they're the same rectangle pattern, I can tab through and begin getting a random feel to that surface. All right, so that's that. Let's do a little more complex kind of geometry inside that panel family, and you may see me trip up and fail on this, so it's always fun to watch me fail. So let's go ahead and make a hexagon family. So I'll do the same thing, a new curtain wall panel pattern family. Make sure I'm on the imperial side. Click on open. All right, and this one I'm going to switch to be the hexagon family. Okay, so on this one I want to create kind of like a starred pattern on it, right? So I think this one's online somewhere. But basically I'm going to elevate it so it's got kind of this quality that's kind of geodesic, diamond-like kind of feel to it. So I need to use my lines to begin building other geometry. So I'm not using reference planes anymore in this type family. I'm actually using I'm not using planes, I'm using reference lines. Now model lines I'm not going to use because model lines I will still be able to see, right? Reference lines I won't see. I just build geometry off of them. So I'll use reference lines. And what I want to do is I want to draw in a line from point 6 to point 3. And then the key to this is to make sure that I'm snapping to the point, not to the lines themselves. And then once I have that, I want to take and select my grid. And how I flex and check this is I take my spacing on my grid and I'm continuously toggling new spacings on my grid to kind of flex that. And you'll see that it didn't stick at all, right? So great, here we go. All right, so now I got to try and figure out a different way to do it. So in this case, I'm going to do it as the reference line going from point 5. So I'm tabbing through to make sure that I'm specifically on the point. So you'll see the difference between being on a line versus being at an intersection versus being at nothing versus being on a specific point itself. So now I'm hovering over and it says that I'm on point. I'm going to drag that over and make sure that I'm on point on number 1 as well. Okay, and then I'm going to flex the grid, tell it that it's at 10 feet by 10 feet, and again it didn't stick. So I'll need to come into my plane. Now when I drag it over, I get my little lock button. So that tells me something. It says that, hey, you're not locking to this. So I want to make sure I click on lock. Click there and I'll click lock. So now that I've explicitly told it to be locked to that, I should be able to flex my grid and it should stay. And it still didn't do it. Okay, so in the event that it doesn't do that, then I need to go to an actual floor plan view and look at this and say, okay, why are you not locking to my pieces? And a lot of times it's an order, again, it's an order of operations. It's where I'm at and how I'm modeling this in the family. So in this case, I want to, 1, make sure that I'm in, well, we'll try one more time in 3D, right? So it's still not sticking. So why isn't it sticking? So let's try this one last time. I'm going to do a reference line. Now one thing in this is when I click on the line, I get this checkbox excuse me, for 3D snapping. So I'm going to go ahead and click on 3D snapping. And now when I click on 3D snapping, it's going to say I am snapping from point to point. And I'm going to escape out. And, I'm going to try it and say that I'm just kind of lucky, and I'm going to do on 2 to 4 as well. So I have my lines in there now. So now if I flex my grid, hopefully it should have stuck to those. So I'll do 12 foot. And there we go. So they actually stuck now. And I'll do the other side now just to make sure that I'm not jiving you here. Select my grid. Do the other one at 12 feet. Oops. Right, if you get like mine, my graphics card's starting to, it needs updating. So you can do zoom full and cure all that. Yeah, it's time for me to buy a new computer. There we go. So yeah, they're stuck. So that's great. So now I got my geometry stuck together. So the next thing is that gives me an ability to put, at least get center lines for each one of these. So I want to put in 2 lines going in the vertical direction. Now that's not easy to do in the 3-dimensional view. I'm going to try and build this whole entire thing in this 3-dimensional view. Because really I want to start getting into that mentality. So first is I'm going to set my work plane. And on that line, I can tab through, and it's got 2 separate work planes associated with it. So I'll pick the one that goes vertical, and then I'm going to set a point at the midpoint of that line. And then I'm going to tab through, and I want to set my work plane again on somewhere on the vertical plane of that point. So I'm specifically drawing on that point itself. You can see the point gives you 3 separate work planes to work from. and I'm going to draw a reference line that's now vertical. And for this, I need to turn off 3D snapping and turn off my chain. Chain's going to allow me to draw multiple lines. And then I want to tab through to make sure I'm specifically on that point. And I'm going to draw it at some extraneous height in the air. And if there's a lock button, lock the thing. Okay? So there we go. Right? Now what I want to do, and before I make the next one, I want to make sure that that order of operations is correct. And I'm going to flex my model to make sure that it moves, and haha, it moves. So that's good. So that confirms that for the second one I do, that's the order of operations that I want to take when making this piece. Right? So again, to recap that, I clicked on set, and I selected the vertical of that line. I placed a point at the center point of that line, and then I tab through again and I set my work plane on that point to be in the vertical direction, and I click on reference line, and I want to draw in a line and make sure I'm snapping directly to that point, and I'm going to draw it at some extraneous height above, and I see my lock buttons, I'm going to lock it. Right, we'll deal with the heights again. Now you'll notice that I accidentally got this one as a model line. I'm not going to worry about it. It's working right now. We can deal with that later. And then I want to flex that particular move set that I did, just to make sure that they're both operating correctly and they're still staying stuck. Okay, so on this one, right, on this one, the same way I did a height parameter, I want to put a height parameter on this as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the line, and the line has an inherent property of length. So that length is going to become my height. So where the dimension or the numerical string is, next to that is a graphical dimension string. I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to assign a parameter to that called height. Okay. And then I'll do the same thing for this line. And then I'm not going to create two different heights. I'm going to just make each one the same height. And I'm going to bring it down to something that's more workable, 12 feet or something like that. So it's not super crazy. Okay, so there's my two lines. Now I could go about, there's a lot of ways I can go about this, right? But pretty much this gives me the foundational framework to make this kind of diamond surface. Right? So I'm just going to go and try and do it now because I have my guts working. I'm not going to try and really do anything more with it. So I'll go back to my reference lines, and I'm going to click on 3D snapping. Now the other part of this is I'm going to make a surface from the closed loops. So I'll click on make surface from closed loops, and I'm going to make sure that I'm snapping to my points and endpoints on this. And one last part is I want to make sure when I do that my chain is clicked. So there's a button that says chain. That's going to allow me to draw polylines in 3D. 3 and 4. And it didn't really pump in my surface, right? So I should probably have two lines there. So in the event that it didn't fill in my surface, there's probably something going on I need to address. But since I did make that move, at this point I'm going to flex the model again and just make sure that everything's snapping and staying snapped to it. And it is, so I'm okay with that. I already have a line here, so all I need is another line here, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll just fill in geometry as if it's plane surfaces. So I don't really need that on anymore. Right, so on this one I'll go ahead and make sure 3D snapping's on. And in this case I'm going to go from 1 to the end point, to the side, and then I'll do another one, making sure that 6, when I'm on the point, I go to another point, it's connected, and then I'll do another one where my pieces up here are connected, so go point to point, and then I'll do another one from point, well that one's already there, so the last piece is this one from point to point. Okay, so now you can see the kind of framework that I'm building for my surface. If I select my grid, I'm going to flex that model one last time. and make sure that everything's snapping together and I'm not breaking it. Because I'd hate to like build all this and think that I'm doing okay, and then all of a sudden I load it into my project and then everything just falls apart. It can get really frustrating. So there we go. So I know now everything's working. I built my wireframe, so it's like wireframe modeling goes into surface modeling, goes into solid modeling. Right? So now the only thing left for me to do is actually fill in my surfaces. So I'll tab 1, tab 2, and tab 3, create form, a panel, tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, create my panel. Right? I'm going to tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 4, create my panel. Tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, create my panel. 1, 2, 3, create my panel. Right, and then I'll flex my model geometry one last time on that and make sure that everything sticks. Yep. So then the last part of this is just to load it into my project. So I'll load that in. I'm going to load it into my mass file. Open up a 3D view. Select my surface. Now it's going to change the pattern. I can't load the hexagon into a rectangle, right? So that's kind of like a no-brainer. Please don't make the mistake of thinking that you can. Really, each one's independent of each other. So I'll try and find my hexagon, and there's my family 3. I'll load that in, and hopefully we don't have the thing completely blow up on us. And there we go. So now I get a really kinked, kind of warped diamond surface out of this. Right? Pretty cool. Quick, easy. Okay.